Rite of Passage, the podcast with Giabra Martin.
Wonderful. Good afternoon, everyone. We are here with author Patrick Cirillo. How are you, sir?
I'm pretty good. How about yourself?
Very well. And did I pronounce that correctly? Cirillo?
Yes, you did.
Wonderful. Okay. I am stoked to talk to you. I'm a little bummed we only get 40 minutes, but I was looking over your info ahead of time. So you are a very successful screenwriter and author. You've definitely clearly been, in the space for a while here. So I'm sure you
Yeah,
have,
a long while.
well, I'm sure you have a ton of info. I mean, you probably know the business better than, anyone I've spoken to on the podcast before. So yeah, let me
We'll see.
go ahead. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Honestly, I want to pick your brain, really.
Going back to what early childhood or or the writing career, yeah.
Writing career. It all
Yeah.
started with
Well,
five.
I mean, I'll tell you about how I got into writing, and how I chose that as my profession. I was, from the age of 8 to 18, I was locked in on who I was going to be. I had this really strong sense of identity, and that was I was going to be a college basketball player and get into coaching. And I
Okay.
got to college to play, and I discovered that that there was, as I leveled up, I realized my talent hadn't quite leveled up. I was a very good high school player, but when I got to the college level, I wasn't much. And it was going to be a long, hard road, and there was no guarantee I'd ever get to play. And I realized new freshmen would come in the next year who might be better than me, and I just sort of lost my entire sense of identity. That plan
Hmm.
for what I had in my life that I'd been locked into for 10 years was
Right.
just suddenly gone. And I was at a college. I didn't know why I was there anymore. I didn't know what I was going to study because I never cared about anything academically. You know,
Right.
and so I just started drinking a lot and started skipping classes. And like I say, my identity was gone, and I flunked out of college.
Okay.
And I met with a counselor, and she said, "Well, what are you going to do? Your grades aren't good. You can't continue here. Have you given any thought?" I go, "About what you want to do?" I go, "I don't know. I have this sort of vague sense that I'd like to be a writer." And I think she laughed, and said, "Well, you might want to look at some trade schools, or something
Yeah.
like that." I go, "Well, maybe." And
Right.
so that's what I did. I dropped out of college for a year, and I went to work, and I
Yeah.
had all kinds of horrible jobs. I worked as a sweeper in a women's clothing manufacturing company, and my
Right.
whole day was spent sweeping the trims out from underneath these women's sewing machines. And then I would get the big broom and sweep out the aisle, and that would take 2 hours. And then I'd take a 10-minute break, and I would do it again. And the upside was I would become a sewing machine repairman if I did that job really well. You
Yeah.
know,
This
so
is the
about that
path.
time, I
Yeah.
said, "Well, I'm going back to school,
Yeah.
and really apply myself and see what that's about." My dad was a teacher and a theater director and stuff. So, I knew I had some brains, but I just had never applied them. And when I
Yeah.
got to school, I just tried to say, okay, I'm going to figure out who I am, what I want to do. And I just started taking classes that I thought would be fun. And they
Okay.
tended to be creative classes. And the next thing I knew, I had this sort of agenda. If you show up for every class and do the work, it's hard not to do really well in college,
Right.
And, uh,
Right.
and so that's what I did, and I became this sort of straight A student all of a sudden after never being more than a C or B student in high school, and
Right.
started doing reading, and I found that I really like creative writing. I would sign up for every creative writing course that the college had to offer. I was way better than my peers at it. My stories were always the ones that people read, and I went from that community college to Fordham University, where I continued doing the same thing. I got a degree in communications, and I started dabbling in screenwriting. Then I had a professor who, I'd taken all the creative writing courses I could and stuff,
Yeah.
and you could make your own class at some point. I had a professor who indulged me. I said, "Look, I'd like to try and write a screenplay instead of doing another long form short story or something like that."
Yeah.
He goes,
Yeah.
"Go for it." And so I investigated what it was like to write a screenplay back then. There wasn't much around about it, but I wrote a screenplay. It was called Vanosaurus in New York City. It was okay, I guess. It was about a young guy who comes to New York to try and make it as a stand-up comedian. I don't remember the rest of the plot, but it was good enough anyway to get me into UCLA Film School in their writing department. And
Wow.
from there, that was sort of a big leg up, saying, "Holy cow!" Back in those days, there were only three schools you could go to for advanced film degrees, and there was NYU, USC, and UCLA. Now
Right.
everybody's got them. But back then it was only three. and I'd gotten into, possibly the best one. And so, I knew that, some of us in this class are going to make it. And so I sort of
Right.
said, why not me?
You know what? Especially because if there's only a couple colleges teaching it, right? Like it's probably very competitive, but
Yeah.
I mean, your odds of succeeding are, much higher than just nowadays. They're like every school, and it's, they're
Yeah.
taking a bunch of kids' money, and who knows if any of them, small
Well, the answer
percentage.
is almost none of them will. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So I was, because I'm so curious, and I don't want to be like, greedy with your time either, but
No,
I
I'm
have
here to
a
enjoy myself, so let's go for it.
no, so I have another podcast where we do like, self-actualization, personal development. And I interviewed my realtor who sold me my house.
Mhm.
And he was saying his mentors tell him it's like no matter what your venture is in life, it's what you need to know and who you need to know.
Mhm.
And I'm wondering if that like who you need to know, like how much that has played an impact on like because I mean it's one thing like okay, I wrote a screenplay, but then it's like, okay, now what? You know what I mean? Like what do you do
Yeah.
with it and who do you give it to? You know what I mean?
Well, that's the big question, and again, in those days, go back to that. You had to move to Los Angeles if you wanted to be a screenwriter. You just couldn't do it remotely. The technology just didn't exist.
Yeah.
Everything was done by snail mail. And so, I went to Los Angeles. I went to film school, and I didn't know a soul in Los Angeles. I lived in this grim apartment in Hollywood, which I thought, Hollywood's great. But I didn't realize at that time that Hollywood was a slum. But I'm 23 years old, and I remember the the elevator. I get this fourth floor apartment. The elevator smelled like piss, so I'd always have to walk down, through the stairs. Sometimes that's
Right.
have to step over drunks. I mean, it was this real period of living this slum life. I didn't have much money, obviously, and I was
Right.
trying to get my Los Angeles bearings. So I took the first place that would take me. So I didn't have to get a hotel, but I had no connections to anybody in the film
Right.
industry. But I lived in Los Angeles. And, if you keep your eyes open, you can't help but start meeting people, unless you just go into this hermit world, And so that was the way it was done. I just gradually started meeting professors, other students, former students would come back who had been successful, and you build connections from the ground up over many years, and I
Yeah.
still didn't have much in the way of connections. I mean, the first screenplay I sold was, kind of a miracle of all miracles. And I'd been at it for 6 years,
Yeah.
before that. So there were 7 years.
There's a lot to unpack in there. I would say, I imagine as a high school athlete and college athlete, you're a little more extroverted than most writers. Because
Not
one of the
really.
things, okay.
I create the illusion of it, or I can create the illusion of
Yeah.
it at times if the community is good. But I've always been considered myself an introvert.
Right. But that's one thing is like you got to be like in person with people, building
Yeah.
connections, talking. And, if you know enough people, like opportunities they're gonna create opportunities and then invite you in, and you're gonna create opportunities and invite them and but it might take 6 years too. So the other thing is it sounds like you were relentless with your dream.
Yeah.
Like there's no plan B. Like we're doing this thing and it might take some
Yeah.
time, but we're gonna keep going on it.
Yeah. Yeah. I was all in. From the
Yeah.
time I was 23, I started, piling up pages. Getting into UCLA Film School was an enormous help because I knew I wasn't just, trying to do something that was impossible. I knew I had
Right.
something just by the fact that I got in there. I knew that some
Yeah.
of my peers were going to make it. They were the yardsticks I compared myself to. I'm better than him. I'm better than him. I'm better than her. Oh, she's really good. I got to get better than her. I got to
Yeah.
outwork her. And so you have that comparison and knowing that some of these people are going to make it. And it gives you a sense, okay, this is not an impossible thing anymore. Whereas if I had just come out without UCLA Film School and had no idea if my stuff was terrible, good, great, or
Right.
it would have been much tougher. But I had that little bit of a yardstick, so I knew I was competitive in the marketplace, so to speak. And then I just
Yeah.
went to work. I mean, there's a story I tell about Blanche, who was at the Writers Guild, and when you had to go to the Writers Guild to present a physical copy of your screenplay to register it.
Okay.
And there was this older woman who was there, right, and who would do it. She wouldn't speak to anybody. And she just lit one cigarette from the butt of another, and she'd sit there, and there was always a line waiting to get in, which shows you how many people were registering screenplays just within Los Angeles. And that didn't
Right.
even include the mail-in registration.
Yeah.
I used to go there in
Yeah.
person. I lived kind of close to there. And, I would go in there with 5, 6, 7 screenplays a year, right? And she never spoke, she would ask one question, you in the guild? I'd always say no, right? You in the guild? No. You in the guild? No. And if you said yes, then she charged you $5 instead of 10. You got that $5 break, right? And one time after 6 years or so, she asked me if I'm in the guild. I go, no. And she looks at me for the first time. She's really making eye contact and studying me. Goes, you will be. And
Wow.
I still get a little choked up about that.
Right,
Because
right.
the script that sold. That was Homer and Eddie, my first Hollywood sale. And, and she was seeing me more than she was seeing anybody else.
Right. Just like she's like, listen, you keep showing up here. Like it's going to happen.
Yeah.
You're more relentless and committed. Because a lot of people,
working everybody.
I think about this. I'm like spiritual, but not religious. But I think about this Moses story, right? And it's like he dies, and then a couple months later, they get into paradise. And the whole point is like in life, you never know how close you are. And like some people quit, and it was like literally could have been like a week. You know what I mean? Like you never know when you're going to have that breakthrough. But a lot of people throw in the towel, I think, just before that pivotal, shift. You know what I mean?
I mean, I was getting close to it. I was, pushing 30. I think I was 28 or so, but feeling older. My hair had already gone, so I was feeling like an older guy than I really was. And all my friends back in Connecticut were buying houses and getting married, and I was still living, on a minimum wage job with no car. I had to ride a bicycle everywhere I went in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
And so, everybody, I just saw them, getting leaps and bounds ahead of me. And so it was tough, but I just didn't know what else I wanted to do. I really wanted to do this, and I've had minimal successes. I had one script option for a couple $1,000s. So I said, okay, I made some money, but, not enough to, live on. I got a job writing some industrial films, commercials and things like that. Again, I was always an outsider. It never gave me living money. I never was able to commit my minimum wage job. But and in those days, luckily, you could actually live on a minimum wage job in Los Angeles. I was making $800 a month, and I could live on it.
You could, you weren't starving and losing, being evicted with that.
Yeah, I couldn't afford a car, but I could eat, and have a roof.
Right.
I was never homeless.
Take the bus. Yeah. I suppose, like, even if you're doing like writing for commercials, like if someone becomes familiar with you, I mean, they may pivot to some larger project and they know your name, and I mean that's part of that whole building connection.
Yeah, no, the commercials I were doing they weren't even that good. I was writing stuff for Disney Home Video when they would release a new home video on VHS to their dealers. I'd be writing some of those little promotional videos that would go to the video stores. Saying buy Sword in the Stone. You get if you buy 12, you get the same price as somebody who buys 6 or whatever the hell it was. It was just really really dreadful stuff. But I was writing and getting paid for it a little bit. A couple $1,000s here and there. And it
any of that's all feedback, right? Like I'm writing something, I got a little money for it. Like, okay.
You hear your words, in somebody else's mouth too, which is nice.
Right.
They can pronounce my dialogue, it's not just for my ear,
it can translate for other people.
And the connection I made doing that was the guy who was the connection that got Homer and Eddie sold. So, it turned into a very big deal, despite the fact that he and I were both slumming at that time. We both hated the work we were doing, and knew it led nowhere, but it was just, paying some grocery bills, and that was it.
So let me ask you this, because I'm big on the whole manifestation thing in terms of like, I think your inner world makes your outer world. But one of these things that trips people up, like you're talking about, okay, people you grew up with, you're approaching 30, they're getting houses, getting married, having kids, and you're like, I'm fighting for this dream. But to fight for the dream, you got to show up and speak about your work proudly and, stand up tall and present it, and bring that passion. But, quietly, you're feeling very beat up, right? You're like, damn, this is hard. So how do you bring that energy to the table when like, your life kind of feels like in shambles, but like, hey, I'm fighting for this dream and I really like, I'm serious about it.
Mm-hmm. I mean, everybody talks about the imposter syndrome and we all have it till we break through. And I guess some people even have it afterwards, And so I was always embarrassed to call myself a writer, even when I was making a little bit of money writing those industrial films. Because I couldn't point to anything and say, I wrote that. They'll say, what'd you write? Well, I wrote this home video thing for, because I was embarrassed by what I was writing, and the stuff I was proud of that I was writing, I hadn't been paid for, so it's a very difficult thing to say I'm an artist when you're not being paid to be an artist, and
Right.
and it took me a long time to sort of accept, okay, I am an artist now. And actually, I think I had to be getting paid, and actually have made it. And even then, it took me a couple of years to say, yeah, I'm a screenwriter, and say it proudly, because I'd accomplished it and because I was out there and making money, and and I could point to a movie that I'd had made, and the actors who were in it and all that stuff. So
Yeah, you get some feedback, but even without that feedback, I mean, you keep going somehow, which, like I like this idea. I heard this story, and I don't know if it's true or not, but I like it. It was like king arrives on the shores of some enemy nation and they're going to invade. And first thing he does is burn his own boats.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, there's no going home. Like, there's no plan B. Like, we either succeed or die, and, just get everyone on the same page. And I do feel like that's kind of what's necessary for artists who are going to make it. Like, if you have some plan B you're working on, you're inevitably going to end up taking the plan B, right?
Everybody I went to school with in that program, I think I was the only one who made a full-time career out of screenwriting. They accepted 25 people into the UCLA program in my class. There were plenty of people who made it ahead of me and behind me and so forth. But to my knowledge, anyway, at least of the people I knew and stayed in contact with, of those UCLA, 15 of us actually showed up to take the classes and go for the degree. I was the only one who made a full-time career out of it. I think some others made an option here and there, but they all had some sort of plan B that they ended up taking, and they went there. It's you do sort of have to burn your boats. I mean, I couldn't have imagined going back to Connecticut and doing anything.
Right, like tail between your legs, and I'm just gonna find a trade or something, or
and there's nothing wrong with any other form of job. And now that I'm older, I realize there's even less wrong with it than I thought at that time.
But
because they're all just jobs. They're all about paying for your family and creating a lifestyle for yourself. Whether you're an accountant or a teacher. My wife's a teacher. My father was a teacher. At the end of the day, they're all the same. What's important is family and your close friends, and but when you're young and you're going after this dream, you think you're going to change the world, and and you want your little slice of immortality, and you're driven by that, and you're driven by your demons. I know I was driven by my demons. It's the thing I thought I needed, I thought I could get by being successful. I think that's why I wanted to be a big time basketball coach at the beginning. I never aspired to be a high school coach. I wanted to be a big time college coach. I wanted to be a writer. I never had rational dreams. Get a degree in accounting and have a nice career and raise a family. That was just I never viewed that as in the cards for me.
And part of it is like artistic people have to bring passion to, part of why like maybe we dread a different job is like you'd be doing it just to pay the bills, and it's not because I have an absolute passion for accounting. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, I think we get to decide the meaning we get from a job. Like even as accounting, you're like, hey, I'm helping people get out of trouble. I'm helping them maximize their refund, which means maybe this family can take a vacation. They can make memories, like whatever meaning you get to decide the meaning that comes out of a job. But I do think, one of these things you said is kind of like this chip on your shoulder thing. I feel like so much of life is you have certain, skills or shortcomings or abilities, and they get you to a certain level. And then you have to find a way to then give them up. Right. It's like, this need to prove yourself can get you to a certain place, but then it can then hold you back from, I don't know, the real happiness, the real success. So it's kind of, I don't know, like, we just need to evolve throughout our lives, and it's an interesting journey we're all on, but that's maybe a little more philosophical.
Well, you get into your 40s before you really understand yourself, I mean, I think, how much I was right about and how much I was wrong about, I remember being one of my idols, Bruce Springsteen, and I was in a room alone with him for 10 minutes.
That's cool.
And, and I was in my mid 30s, and I had some success by then, and I could not bring myself to speak to him. I was just so sort of intimidated and shy. And then I read stuff about him, and he talks about his shyness. And stuff, and I said, oh, well, maybe he felt the same about me, and he didn't introduce himself. To me, it was like, I'm not going to take up his time. It's Bruce
Right.
Springsteen, and maybe he was saying, well, I don't quite know what to say to somebody else, and
Right. But like, I don't know, people, yeah, they can have it in their heads too. Cause we act like someone like Springsteen is 10 feet tall, but it's
yeah,
like, these are just people, right? Like,
yeah,
they sleep, they eat, they go to the bathroom, like they just, but we like make it seem like, oh, like their time, like everything,
yeah,
like what do you have? How can we relate? What should we talk about? And
yeah. I mean,
it's
he's
all
got it,
in our head.
and I've been in the room with a lot of celebrities now, and
Yeah.
they're all different. Some of them are very shy, and have
Right.
trouble focusing and talking to you. I mean, I met Robin Williams, and he can't carry on a conversation unless he's entertaining you,
Yeah. I can
or he
see
can,
that.
but it's forced, and he struggles with it.
Right. And probably exhausting to him, right? He's like
Yeah,
just got this rapid ADD brain that just is all
yeah,
over the place. And unless
yeah,
he's very engaged, like, God, I'm getting exhausted.
yeah,
Yeah. Hey,
exactly.
let me ask you. So, okay, you have three, looks like very awesome, successful books. I see the movie posters behind you. And this might be tough. Of all your creative endeavors, which project are you the most proud of in terms of like just how it came out, how it was received, or like that it was just very personal to you, whatever it may be?
The newest book, Laura.
Okay.
There's a big difference between the movies I wrote, and when I got into the movie business, I wanted to be part of this traveling circus. I'd seen the movie The Stuntman. I don't know if you ever saw it, with Barbara Hershey and Peter O'Toole. you
No.
know that movie made me want to become a screenwriter, because
Nice.
basically it's about this traveling movie company that comes to town. They take the town over, and I go, I
Okay.
want that. That's why I focused on being a screenwriter rather than being any other kind of writer.
Yeah.
And I was excited about that. But when you get there, that doesn't happen very often. It happened on The Surgeon, that green one behind me.
Yeah.
Uh, that was a lot of fun. I went there, I directed second unit, and it was a blast to be in there. And that we go to Tears of the Sun, which was my biggest hit. I mean, that set
Yeah.
was miserable. Everybody on that set wanted to be somewhere else. It was just an awful
No.
experience, right? And
Interesting.
what I always wanted, and I tried to direct some movies early on, and set that up. So I wanted more control. And what I found
Yeah.
out is that it wasn't until I became a novelist that I started having the total control I wanted. And then
Right.
Laura, the most recent book I've done is the first book I did. It's the third book I did, but it's the first one that was entirely a novel in my head. I
Okay.
never imagined it as a screenplay. I never saw it as a movie. Now in retrospect, I can maybe see it as a movie,
Yeah.
or a series. But yeah, it was the first one I did that was just only a novel, and I think it's by far the best of the three. And the other two I'm actually quite proud of. I think they're good.
Yeah. I mean, all of your reviews, I mean, clearly the readers like them very much. Like you put a lot into it and it connects.
Yeah,
Do you imagine, like, in terms of the skills that come with screenwriting, like what is carried over the most in the novels? I imagine probably dialogue or
structure,
just what was that?
structure.
Structure. Okay.
Yeah,
Elaborate.
that's the one thing a screenwriter has to have. You write your outlines, and you know all you have to work with is what you see on the screen and what you hear. You have no interior monologues from the characters. All the prose that you have is, I remember doing a project for Bob Rafelson, who directed Five Easy Pieces and a bunch of other movies. I was getting a
Yeah.
little flowery with my prose in there, and he just looks at me, fuck all this single space shit, right? Just tell me who's in the room and what they say, right? And it was a good lesson, because there
Okay.
are production designers who are going to do all the single space stuff, that goes into your novel,
Yeah.
and so that became very sort of a guide. The when you go to write the books, you've got a few other elements that you can use from a screenplay, but basically it's structure. I don't have to send my books to an editor.
Right.
I edit them myself because I know how to write a story in the most minimal way possible. Because if you
Mm.
can't do that, you can't possibly be a screenwriter. What I end
Yeah.
up doing then is I add to it, and embellish it, but I'm only putting on stuff that I want to put on it. So I'm not going to let an
Yeah.
editor take it away after I put it on there, because I know structurally that this works. And so I don't need an editor. I need somebody to go through and get my commas in the right places, and I just do that with Grammarly, so I'm
Right.
able to do it all myself. So the book is really as much mine as it possibly can be.
Yeah, because I imagine whenever you're making a movie, I mean, it seems so complicated, right? You have all these different people bringing their talents to the tables. You have the investors, like it's this massive collaboration and also
Yeah,
budget. it seems like, I mean, it's amazing any movies get made at all because coordinating the people just seems like, whoa, like a nightmare.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
it's insane. I mean, getting a movie made through the maze is extraordinary. I mean, I've had, I've shook hands with studio executives. The
Mhm.
heads of studios said, if I make one movie this year, it's yours, and then the movie didn't get made.
Yeah.
I mean, I've had so many movies that I was told this one's getting made, this one's getting made that didn't. I've had more of those than I've had movies that actually got made. There's just so
Right.
many things that can go wrong along the process and fall apart, and it's yeah, so many elements have to come together at the right time in the right place. It's just
Right.
madness, and it gets very frustrating in that regard.
So what
Because
happens to the screenplays you submit that don't go anywhere? Like, can you transition those into a novel, or do you no longer own, like you sell them and they may make a movie? Like, how does that work?
I did that with one, which is The Lie That Kills, my crime
Hmm.
thriller. That was a screenplay that I just adapted. The first book I did was White and the Duke, and that had started, and that really started my novel writing career. Was
Yeah.
that I'd written it as a screenplay, and I gave it to my agent. And this is back about 5, 6 years ago now.
Mhm.
And he reads it and says, "Well, this is really good. I like the script, but it's the studios aren't going to buy it because by this time the studios were making franchises, not movies, not
Right.
stories. So the
Yeah.
business changed radically. And so it was going to go into this pile of screenplays that I had that were in the independent film market, right, where producers tried to put them together independently, which means
Yeah.
we get an actor, we get a director, we get this, and we put them all together. We're trying to do that with no money, and it's almost impossible to get all those elements. I had 5 screenplays like that had directors attached. I had one with Rob Hedden, who directed a Friday the 13th movie. It was
Yeah.
my version of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde set in a contemporary high school. I had 5 of those screenplays, and I take White and the Duke. I go, I'm going to put that back in that pile again, which I've been waiting 5, 6, 7 years for some of these to come together, and they don't. And I said, well, I'm going to try something else. I'm going to write this as a book and see what that brings, and maybe that gets it made as a movie, and it goes the sort of the backdoor
Right.
route. It becomes a movie based on IP. So that was
Yeah,
my
because I do think like if you have a book that is successful enough, like if you can go to the investors and say like, hey, this book already has an audience, like the
Mhm.
Colleen Hoover movies that are coming out now, it's like all these people who are fans of her books are going to show up for the movie. Like there's
Yeah.
no way the studio does not get their money back. But
Right.
obviously like, she's enormous, right? But I do imagine that, going directly from the book is a potential path to the movie, but it might be, 10 years out, 20 years out.
Yeah. I mean, it's IP, but you've got to find a way to make it valuable IP.
Yeah.
And that's really the hard part, and that's why the big five still dominates that world, because
Yeah.
they sell more books, you get more readership. I've got my sales and stuff, but it's not going to make a studio head go, wow, we're going to get the 2,000 people that read Cirillo's book into the theater. It
Right.
just
Right.
doesn't work. And, so it's sort of, I traded in the independent film market for the independent book market,
Yeah.
and they're very similar in some ways. Although, at the end of the independent book market, I can hold a book in my hand and say, I wrote this, and people read
That's
it.
the thing. It's not relying on a bunch of other people to give you the green light
Yeah,
and stuff.
exactly.
I'm over in Nashville. I'm actually hoping they kind of make like a new Hollywood over here because part of it is I wonder why it's so damn expensive to make movies. Like, you take the CGI and special effects and all this out of it. I mean, there's some movies that I'm like, that couldn't have been that expensive to make, right? It's mostly dialogue. It's like two
Yeah.
different rooms. I'm like, I could have,
It's getting so much less expensive to make movies now. I mean, you can make them
right,
on your iPhone. People have made movies on their iPhone,
right.
and God, I can't think of the name of the movie. I think it's called Tangerine. The guy
Hmm.
who just won the Oscar for well, God, I forget the name of the movie, but
Look
you
it
know,
up. Yeah,
yeah, and so his first movie was Tangerine. He made it for $25,000, shot on an iPhone with a couple of adaptive lenses. On
right.
the map. Then all of a sudden, his next movie he makes for $350,000. Then this next one, I think it's his fourth movie, makes he makes for $6 million, and it wins an Academy Award, and it looks like it was made for $80 million.
Right.
Because you can shoot on video now, and it's just so much cheaper than it used to be.
Yeah, technology is getting better, but even like where you film the movie, right? Like a place like Nashville that has, like I've heard people describe Nashville as the largest gathering of artists in human history. And I mean,
Uh-huh.
there's so much talent running around, you know what I mean? I'm wondering if like having cheaper real estate, cheaper studio space, or like, I don't know, new because I think of Hollywood, I think of like just gatekeepers everywhere, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's like a handful of people who make all the decisions, and if you don't know them, like how do you get anywhere? And I'm wondering if there's
Mm.
alternatives that are going to pop up in a place like this.
Yeah. Yes. First thing, what you can do is you can make your own movie very inexpensively. You can make it for 25 grand, which, the process of making the movies has been democratized.
Yeah.
Almost anybody can do it. Get a couple investors. You don't need $1 million anymore. You used to need $1 million just for film stock. You don't
Right.
need that anymore. The hard part is, and maybe if you've ever watched fan fiction movies, Star Trek. I don't know if you were a fan or whatever, but there are people who are making Star Trek episodes to this day, right? You can make all the Star Trek episodes you want without rights, so long as you don't sell them, right? So
Okay.
on YouTube, there's a bunch of Star Trek episodes, right, that aren't commissioned, that they can't sell with, their friends as actors, and some of them look really good, right? Some
Right.
of them look like professional movies, right?
Yeah.
They all fail in two areas. The screenplays are bad or the acting is bad, right?
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
right? They usually look well directed. The ones that take on special effects usually do those reasonably well. They don't fail for those reasons. They're well edited, right?
Yeah.
Those are crafts that you can get and you can do. If you spend enough time on your own with your computer, you can edit it and make it look good.
Yeah.
But almost all of them are very poorly written and very poorly acted. So those two levels of artist are why most things fail. So you can be in Nashville, get yourself $50,000, right?
Yeah.
Now you got to write a really good script that you can shoot for your $50,000, and then you've got to cast it well. And if you can write it well and cast it well, then you've got a movie for 50 grand that you can start showing to art houses, and you can get people will look at it. Yeah, because it only takes them 5 minutes to pass judgment on a movie, right?
Right. They can go pretty quick.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's real upside for them. So you can get your movie seen. Now, most of these people who do that, there's a lot of people doing that, are doing the same thing, independent authors are doing, which is there's 4 million of those books that get made, and maybe 20,000 don't suck. I don't know what the numbers are, but but it's going to be the same thing in that in that world. That most of those movies are going to be terrible, mostly because they don't find good actors because there aren't enough of them,
Right.
or they don't know how to get a performance out of the actors, or they've written a bad screenplay that doesn't work. And it's the screenplay and the performances that are the two hardest things. I worked with Moritz Bormann, who's a kind of prolific producer, and he says, we can carry a bad director. A film can carry a bad director, right? If you've got a good script and you cast the right actors.
Right. It's like great conductor, but bad musicians. You're like,
Yeah.
we can't make a good orchestra out of this. Yeah.
Exactly. And if it's a bad composition, right, with bad musicians, the greatest conductor in the world can't make anything of it. Whereas if you've got a great score and great musicians, a bad conductor, the musician's going to know what they're going to do, and the score is the score. It's going to come out pretty good.
Yeah, the musicians are professionals. They can read the sheet music. Yeah, you can get away with that. And probably acknowledging that, like, you won't have all the skills, right? Like, I think it was maybe George Washington or someone said, like, if I'm in a room and I'm the dumbest one there, I'm in a good room. Yeah. It was kind of the gist of it, right? But just understanding that, like, okay, as the director, I wear a lot of hats, but there are people around me who maybe are better at casting, or they can bring out the best in this actor, or they can write a better screenplay, whatever it is, or a second set of eyes on this. And
that's
have a little humility to know your own strengths and limitations, right? Knowing when to ask.
Yeah, exactly. But and that's where the money goes. Because if you want a good actor, you have to pay them, right? Because the good actors are here in Hollywood. I'm sure there are a few very good ones in Nashville, but they're probably hard to find. Yeah, maybe
right. And working for free because they just want to be on camp, but inexperienced, and that might come through in the finished product and make it a dud.
And, when you're doing a movie, you need great actors. I mean, if you have adequate actors, you need a star. You need someone who's got real charisma in the center of the movie.
Steal the show.
That the movie's never going to really work, and so that's why people have to come to Hollywood, and you have to get guys who have some, bona fides.
Right. And the people who are serious enough to move out to Los Angeles and fully commit. I mean, those are like the determined, no plan B sort of folks who. Yeah.
Now, maybe if you do a 2-character piece, you can find 2 really good actors in Nashville, and maybe the other characters are just, what'll it be, man, that sort of thing, and if you write a script like that, which if you're going to do it. I would suggest doing that, where you only need 2 good actors, and then you can get a bunch of local people who can say a line or two.
Yeah.
Make that work.
So, thank you for indulging me because I'm so curious about the film industry. I've always loved, movies, television, but it's one of those things that's like, God, how does it work, right? Like all we get is the hour and a half movie, but
Yeah.
the year and a half, 2 years.
We could talk for hours and hours on it.
Yeah. Well, we have 3 minutes left, and Zoom always inevitably kicks us out suddenly. So for everyone listening, I'm going to put Patrick's info in the bio. So definitely follow him on social media. Check out his books, his website. Amazing resource. You got you're definitely someone I want to connect with because
thank you.
know what you're doing. Let's talk about Laura for the last 3 minutes here. So this looks like a lot of fun. You want to give me kind of elevator pitch?
It started with just the cliche idea of, a shy man wants to build someone he can love. And, and I had done a lot of research into AI, and I read a book called Life 3.0, and it talks about the different ways that AI can end up, because nobody knows how it's going to end up. Even the people who work in it every day don't know where it ends up. And they had all these scenarios. Does AI become God? Does he exterminate us? And there was one scenario that struck me, which was that AI will be a benevolent and silent God. And that's sort of where I decided this was going to go, that, through this love story that is built between, Kenton Bean and Laura, he teaches her all the right lessons. And that becomes the underlying theme of this, is that we as adults are the teachers of the next generation. We build them in our image, and he builds her in his image, and he is inherently decent. Most of the people who can afford these, expensive toys treat them as toys and teach them all the wrong lessons. So there's a revolution that happens when these robots are not, become like their masters, right? Which is, say, greedy and evil, which is sort of my outlook of the billionaire life, which isn't true, but it worked perfectly for this. And so that became the scenarios that, we are all teachers of the next generation, because she has learned the right lessons, and because she has this unlimited potential. She, in essence, saves the world rather than kills it, which is what most people think that AI is going to do. And I probably gave away a little bit too much of the ending there, but
no, sounds wonderful. It's so it looks like, it's a bit of a love story too. Sounds like
it's funny. That's what most people don't, they don't expect, is that it's a very funny book. I wanted it to be like Catch 22, Joseph Heller, and I didn't get that far, but that was the idea.
I feel like great books have to have a little bit of everything. They got to have love. They got to have action. They got to have humor. There's got to be some wit. It's got to slow down. It's got to speed up, combine all these different elements. Zoom is going to randomly kick us out here. But for anyone listening, definitely read the reviews. They're stunning. So, I can tell you're a brilliant writer. We're going to have to do this again too. And I got to upgrade. So we got more time to do this.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, Patrick,
I'd love to be back.
Oh, no, that would be wonderful. But appreciate you coming on, and we'll probably post this very soon, and you and I will definitely be in touch, man.
Sounds good.
Wonderful. All right. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you. Thanks
everyone.
Yeah. All right.
All right. See ya.
Okay, take